Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu, filling in for Riz Khan. Today we continue our look at the Iraq War 5 years on. Was the removal of Saddam Hussein and the subsequent occupation worth it for the United States? It's already cost America nearly 4,000 troops and about $200 million a day. For Iraqis, the death toll ranges anywhere from just under 90,000 to over 1.5 million people. On today's show, we talk with former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense Richard Perle. Don't forget, we also take your calls on the show. You can reach us there at the numbers at the bottom of your screen. Joining me now is Richard Perle, a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Mr. Perle, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
5 years on, how do you see Iraq?
Well, I think it's improving since the change in policy that's often referred to as the surge, which is more than just sending a few thousand additional troops. It's a whole change in the approach to the situation, and one that appears to be working reasonably well. It's been a very difficult 5 years, obviously, and the insurgency that was not anticipated as it in fact developed has claimed a great many lives, innocent lives mostly. People have been killed in order to try to terrorize them and to drive the United States out. After all of that, it's 5 years later, and Saddam Hussein is no longer ruling that country brutally, sadistically as he once did. And the Iraqi people have shown extraordinary courage in standing up and expressing themselves at the ballot box, and frankly in putting up with the tremendously difficult situation they faced. And I think they're now coming out of it.
When you say the surge, I mean, a lot of the reduction in the level of violence is also can be attributed to the fact that many of the Sunni militias are now on the side of the United States, these so-called awakening councils. That's one thing. The other is that Muqtada al-Sadr is still holding to a ceasefire, so that has contributed quite a bit to that.
I certainly agree with that. The change in the attitude of the traditional Sunni leadership has been crucial to this. As for Muqtada al-Sadr, he's certainly capable of igniting violence and seems to have specialized in doing that.
Well, I want to ask you about that because, I mean, that is very tenuous, isn't it? He could change his mind tomorrow.
Well, I'm not sure he has the capacities today that he had before, and I think one of the reasons for his ceasefire is that if there were no ceasefire, he would be hard put to demonstrate the capabilities he had a year ago. I think he's declined significantly, and that's a good thing because he was certainly not contributing to the reconstruction, the peaceful democratic development of Iraq.
What about the political changes that the United States wanted in Iraq? The government in Iraq, the political institutions in Iraq have not lived up to that, have they?
I think they're coming along. I wish there were an easy, quick way to bring about democratic reform, but after 3 decades of Saddam Hussein, I wouldn't fault the distance that the Iraqis have come. Against that background, they've made significant progress. And at the end of the day, when they do achieve decent representative government, a humane government, it may not look exactly like our concept, but that's all right. They're Iraqis. They have to choose their own approach to governance. I just hope that it's decent and humane.
It may not be all right for Iraqis on the ground. I mean, there is a deep level of hostility between Sunnis and Shias, which actually didn't really exist at that level under Saddam Hussein. It does exist now.
Well, under Saddam Hussein, of course, the Shia were brutally repressed and had really no opportunity to express themselves. A lot of what we've seen, I think, is payback for that period in which the Shia were so seriously oppressed. And some of the violence from the Sunni side has come from Sunnis who actually enjoyed being in the position of the oppressor and are very unhappy with what has now happened, because Iraq now more or less has begun to reflect the distribution of population, and it is a majority Shia country. So there's a long way to go in a real reconciliation, but I believe it's possible.
Your views on the war, on the decision to invade Iraq, they appear to be somewhat ambivalent when one reads about what you've been saying over the years. Initially, you were a strong supporter of that, but I'm looking at an article that was in Vanity Fair, and I'm going to quote from it here, in which you said, "I think if I had been Delphic and had seen where we are today, and people had said, should we go into Iraq, I think I probably would have said no. Could we have managed the threat by means other than a direct military intervention? Well, maybe we could have." That's what you said to Vanity Fair. And then very recently, just a few days ago, this is what you said to the Daily Telegraph in London. You said, "I believe the right decision was made. Baghdad fell in 21 days with few casualties on either side. 25 million Iraqis had been liberated and Saddam's menace eliminated. There would be no weapons of mass murder to be shared with terrorists." So you've changed your mind several times.
Well, of course, the remark from Vanity Fair was made last November when, at what may have been the darkest moment, when I believed the United States was pursuing a wrong and fatal strategy. Happily, that changed, and we're now pursuing a strategy that I think has a reasonable chance of success. I did not anticipate how badly the administration would mess things up, frankly. I believed that after Saddam was removed, we would turn things over to the Iraqis, and the Iraqis would begin the process of developing their own institutions, preparing for elections, managing the country, with the United States at their side to be helpful. I never anticipated that we would send somebody from Washington, in fact, some thousands of people from Washington, to try to govern Iraq. We didn't know how to do that. It was a foolish venture. We should never have done it. And so I was deeply disappointed in that. And when I said if I'd been Delphic, what I had in mind was if I had understood how badly the follow-up to Saddam's removal was going to be handled.
When you say a reasonable chance of success, even now, how do you measure that? At what point could you say, for instance, U.S. troops could start returning to the United States?
Well, I don't measure success by the return of U.S. troops. I know
well, that's just one measure, but I'm wondering how you
a lot of people do.
Yeah.
We still have troops in Germany. Long time after World War II.
But they're not playing the same role.
They're not playing the same role, and so I think that's very important. If American troops were still essential to maintaining security 5 years from now, that would not be very successful. So the handover has to take place, but I believe there is a role for the United States in an improving situation, which is very different from the role that we played before the surge, and even different from the role that we've been playing since the surge.
When you look at this, the last 5 years, and if you ask yourself, why did the United States go to war? Were there any specific aims that the United States had in mind, and have those aims been achieved?
Yes. There were very clear aims in mind. One has to go back sort of psychologically to September 11, 2001. The administration looks around and says, my God, what might happen next? And the fear that seized senior officials of the administration, from the president on down, was the possibility of another attack, this time with chemical or biological weapons, or even nuclear weapons or nuclear materials. And so the administration asked itself, could this happen? And if so, who is capable of doing it? And they made up a list. And Saddam Hussein was on that list because he was believed to possess stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction. And he was known for sure to have created them in the past and actually to have used them. So the United States went into Iraq to eliminate that threat, not to build democracy, not to steal Iraq's oil, not for broad geopolitical reasons, but because the importance of dealing with that threat became a near obsession of the administration after 9/11.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. If those aims have been met, is the United States, or the security of the United States, is it more secure today than it was, say, before the invasion?
Well, I think we are more secure than we were before the invasion. And we're certainly more secure than we were before 9/11. Before 9/11, we were as vulnerable as we were found to be on 9/11. And if bin Laden had waited until he got the biological weapons he was looking for, God knows how many people would have died in New York City or in some other attack. So we've now come to terms with the seriousness of not only bin Laden, but people around the world, happily not in huge numbers, but in significant numbers, who want to destroy Americans in America and will commit suicide in the process of doing it and will inflict as much damage as they can. So are we safer now? We certainly are. We understand the threat we face, and we didn't understand that before.
I want to come back just now to the link that's been made between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. But first, I want to get a call in. This is Hussein calling us from Saudi Arabia. Hussein, go ahead with your question.
Yes, good evening. I just have a question that the murderous attacks of 9/11, of September the 11th, the people who were behind it are being chased in Afghanistan, and rightfully so, because there were 3,000 innocent people killed. There were 3,000 innocent troops plus killed in Iraq because they were led to an unjust war by false and evidence and lies. Why aren't the people responsible for that being tried till today, including Mr. Perle, of course?
Well, I would like to see some Saudis tried for contributing vast amounts of money to the development of extremist institutions all over the world. It has not been lost on the American people, if I may say this to the caller, that most of the hijackers came from your country, and a great many other terrorists come from your country. So we went into Iraq because we were threatened by Iraq. The fact that we didn't find the weapons of mass destruction does not entitle you to say that there was a lie. Our intelligence agencies...
You do not believe there is any legal culpability whatsoever?
No, I don't believe there is any legal culpability. I think we have every right to defend ourselves. And the invasion of Iraq was an act of self-defense. Now, we're not going to wait again until we're attacked. If we can see an attack taking shape, and we can act in a timely fashion to stop that attack, we're going to do it, especially in a world in which there are suicidal terrorists who are trying very hard to obtain weapons of mass destruction.
Let's get another call in. This one's from John in London. Go ahead, John.
Yes, good evening, sir. I just want to say, ask Mr. Richard about what's happening in Iraq. Everybody is so concerned about what's happening in Iraq. Yeah, we want democracy in Iraq. Yeah, we want democracy in Iraq. The first thing the government, the world leaders, turned to Saddam, they found Saddam in front of everybody, the kids, everybody.
So, I'm sorry, what was your question, John?
Yeah, my question is, we want democracy in Iraq. So where's the democracy? People are dying in Iraq.
Oh, okay, okay.
I wasn't hearing very well.
Yeah, no, that was not very clear. I think the question was, the United States went into Iraq to establish a democracy, but everyday people are dying in Iraq.
Right. Well, we didn't go into Iraq to establish a democracy. We went into Iraq because we believed that Saddam Hussein posed a threat to the United States.
But that's what it's become, hasn't it? I mean,
Oh, well, once we were there,
yes.
Once Saddam was removed, then the question became what kind of government is going to follow. There are people who argued that we should try to find another Saddam. We should try to find another really tough, brutal character who would not have allowed this sort of trouble that we've had these last 5 years. That is not something the United States could responsibly, morally, honorably do. So we had tried to encourage the development of democratic institutions. I think we were slow in turning to the Iraqis to govern themselves, and I think that's the main mistake that we made in Iraq. If we had turned to Iraqis the day Baghdad fell, we might not be in the situation we're in today. But lastly, let me say to the caller, democracy it doesn't fall from the heavens. People have had to fight for it. Americans died in large numbers to create this democracy. Frenchmen died in numbers to create French democracy. So to say that if people die, you can't have a democracy, or the democracy that results after a battle is somehow wrong, I think is a misreading of history.
But in reality, the United States is now involved in nation building in Iraq. And hasn't it got to a situation where the United States is now really bogged down in Iraq? You can't leave for fear of more violence, for fear that certain groups may be able to flourish. Groups like Al-Qaeda may be able to flourish even further. You can't leave for that reason.
Well, this is the sense in which we are confronting the war on radical terrorists in Iraq. We're confronting them elsewhere too, but we're confronting them now in Iraq. Look, the idea that a number of suicidal terrorists can take over a country and inflict terrible damage and go out of their way to try to ignite sectarian divides that they know will produce additional violence, that's unacceptable. The whole world should regard that as unacceptable. Could Al-Qaeda come back after we leave? I don't think we're going to leave until we're confident that Al-Qaeda can't come back. And by the way, I think Al-Qaeda is a rapidly declining force in Iraq. I think they're struggling to stay alive as an organization in Iraq. There are always going to be young people who are persuaded to commit suicide in order to inflict damage. It's a real tragedy. The people who train them, the people who recruit them are not committing suicide, but they're sending young, impressionable people to do that. And that's a threat that the whole world has to face now.
Is it your view that one of the ways in which America could secure its interests around the world is through this doctrine of regime change? You've advocated that in Iran, you've advocated that in Syria.
Yes. There are some regimes in the world that are brutal to their own people and that pose a threat to others. The Syrians, for example, pose a threat to Lebanon and to a peaceful democracy in Lebanon. The regime in Tehran is supporting terrorism and diminishing whatever chance there is for settling the dispute between Israelis and Palestinians. So sure, I'd like to see governments in both of those places that would be more amenable to peace, that would not support terror, that would not interfere in a neighbor as Syria interferes in Lebanon. Now, I'm not recommending that we invade Syria. I'm not recommending that we invade Iran. There are people in both Syria and Iran, and there are people outside those countries who are from those countries who want to see regime change, and I believe we should be supporting them. I think they should have a chance within their own countries to get a better life for themselves and their neighbors.
We've got about 30 seconds left. I want to get this question in. Did Israel's security interests play any role in the decision to go to war in Iraq?
No, I don't believe so. In fact, the Israelis strongly counseled against going into Iraq. They had their own view. They believed that if we went into Iraq, it would limit our ability to go into Iran, which they thought was far more important. I never spoke to a single Israeli who favored our going into Iraq.
Richard Perle, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being with us. On tomorrow's show, we go behind the shadows with the former head of the Mossad, Efrahim Halevi. Don't forget, if you have any thoughts about pressing issues around the world, send your emails to riz@aljazeera.net. See you next time. Street Talk is next.